Clearly, Democrats lost terribly in the worst way ever.
We should be focused like a laser on delivering the basics and ignore the fashionable nonsense. I felt like the Biden administration did make fatal miscalculations that cost us the election. Abolishing prisons or abolishing the police or abolishing ICE. Those ideas do not come from working class people from places like the Bronx. Those ideas typically come from activists and academics who are out of touch with working class people.
A Democrat congressman is straight up calling out his own party for being completely out of touch and failing to grasp the basic things people want from their government. Let's check this out.
Well, look, for me, the Democratic Party should have a simple mission, which is to lower costs, lower crime rates, make government work for the people rather than for the interest groups. And we have to recognize that working class voters of color are largely in the center on issues like public safety and border security. And we have to meet them where they are. If we swing the pendulum too far to the left, we risk alienating working class people of color. And working class people of color are no different from most Americans. Most Americans want the basics, an affordable cost of living, safe streets, secure borders. And so we should be focused like a laser on delivering the basics and ignore the fashionable nonsense that has taken hold in our politics.
The congressman didn't hold back, calling out Democrats for being completely out of touch with what people actually need. Instead of focusing on practical issues, they've prioritized trendy causes like free healthcare for illegal immigrants, housing for the homeless, and even removing U-turn signs for being offensive. Meanwhile, cities like Los Angeles are left with failing fire departments and rising chaos. He blamed Biden directly, saying his out-of-touch policies have driven the party further away from common sense. From open borders to defunding police and pushing radical medical procedures for kids, the Democrats' priorities are a disaster, and it's costing them big time.
When you say swing too far to the left, what do you mean specifically?
Well, in the case of the 2024 election, it was immigration. As I've said repeatedly, I felt the president did too little, too late to secure the border, and we paid a heavy price in the 2024 election. For me, both inflation and immigration were the leading causes of Democratic defeat in 2024. And in the case of immigration, I felt like the Biden administration did make fatal miscalculations that cost us the election.
Kamala Harris claims there's nothing she would have done differently, and that mindset has left people frustrated after 4 years of failed leadership. Joe Biden spent his final days in office insisting he had done amazing things for the country, despite clear evidence to the contrary. The truth is, most Democrats couldn't speak out against Biden's failures because they were complicit. For years, they defended him, saying he was sharp, in control, and that his policies were working, even as inflation soared and the border crisis worsened. Calling him out would mean admitting they misled the public. This is when the congressman drops a bombshell on the party, leaving both the Democrats and the Morning Joe panel completely speechless. Watch this.
Yeah, so I spoke to an activist who was advocating for abolishing the police, and I said, let me get this straight. You want to conduct a social experiment on the lowest income communities of color in places like the Bronx. And what happens if that experiment goes badly? What happens if it leads to an outbreak of gun violence and gang violence and youth violence? Like, you live in a wealthy white neighborhood in an ivory tower, insulated from the consequences of your utopianism. Whereas my constituents are poor people of color who have to live with high costs and high crime rates. And we should be speaking to the lived experience of people of color. You know, when you consider some of the most utopian ideas in politics, whether it's abolishing prisons or abolishing the police or abolishing ICE, those ideas do not come from working class people from places like the Bronx. Those ideas typically come from activists and academics who are out of touch with working class people.
This is exactly the kind of thing we're always pointing out about the ladies of The View. Their ideas sound more like theoretical debates between professors than real-world policies meant to solve actual problems. Sunny Hostin constantly talks about how everything is racist, all while living in her luxurious New York mansion. Meanwhile, Whoopi Goldberg claims to be working class because she shows up to The View daily, even though she's making an $8 million yearly salary. And then there's the broader hypocrisy: Democrats who champion open borders until migrants show up in their elite neighborhoods, or who cry defund the police while hiring private security. They call a border wall racist while living in gated communities. Have any of these wealthy liberals ever asked people in inner cities, the ones facing skyrocketing gun violence, if they'd feel safer without police on the streets? Of course not. They've convinced themselves that their fashionable talking points are progressive and virtuous without considering the real-world impact of their policies. When Democrats push soft-on-crime policies while simultaneously defunding the police, chaos is the predictable result. They act like they know better because they're college-educated, making decisions they believe stem from empathy and compassion, yet they rarely, if ever, consult the people most affected by these disastrous policies. It's a recipe for disaster, and they're shocked every time it fails.